Williston's funeral home always struck me as too pretentious for ordinary people like us. The smooth marble, the heavy curtains, the subdued light, it was supposed to be comforting to the mourners. But personally, it irritated me. Sylvia's cold hand was still warm in my memory, and these men in black were already fussing around me with an expression of professional sympathy. It was as if my 53 years beside her could be wrapped in mourning ribbons and closed tightly with a coffin lid. "Mr. Blackwell, would you like to sit down?" I turned to Agatha Pringle, our neighbor for the past 20 years. Her wrinkled face expressed a genuine concern that was rare among those present. "No, thank you, Agatha. I'll stand." My head was ringing from the silence, punctuated only by whispers and the creaking of the parquet under the feet of the guests. I counted 34 people. Not bad for a woman who always said she had no more than 5 real friends. Most of the people who came were my former colleagues from the DA's office, a few of Sylvia's book club friends, a couple of distant relatives, and of course, Vernon. My son stood at the buffet table, tapping his fingers nervously on his whiskey glass. 42 years old, and he still looked like a boy who couldn't wait to get away from a tedious family dinner. His light brown hair, just like Sylvia's, had thinned at the top of his head, and there were wrinkles in the corners of his eyes. He didn't cry at the ceremony. Not even when the priest spoke of the maternal love with which Sylvia had surrounded her only son. Not even when they closed the casket. "He just experiences grief differently," Sylvia would say. She always protected him. Even when he stole my car at 16 and wrecked it. Even when he dropped out of college after his first semester. Even when he traded a stable job at a law firm for shady investment projects that never paid off. "He's looking for himself, Larry," she said, stroking my arm with her slender fingers. "You can't make a man live by someone else's plan." I watched Vernon tipping his third glass of whiskey into himself and remembered the day he was born. Sylvia had said then, "Look, Larry, he's got your chin and my eyes." I remember holding his tiny body for fear of breaking something in this fragile creature. When did that wall of alienation grow between us? "How are you holding up, old boy?" A cold hand rested on my shoulder, snapping me out of my memories. Edmund Pickering, my former colleague, and perhaps the only person I could call a friend. His once coal-black hair now resembled salt and pepper, and his glasses were thicker, but his gaze was still as penetrating as it had been in the days when we'd worked together on complex cases. "As you can see," I spread my hands, "standing, breathing." Sylvia was a wonderful woman, I nodded. What can I say? She really was wonderful, patient, understanding. She put up with my delays at work, my angry outbursts after losing cases, my periods of silence when it seemed that justice was just a nice word in law textbooks. I remembered our first meeting in the law school library. She was working as a librarian's assistant while she was in history school. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm afraid you're 2 weeks overdue for a book return," she said then, looking at me with her clear gray eyes. In lieu of a fine, I offered her coffee. She agreed on the condition that I would finally return the ill-fated history of constitutional law. "Have you decided what you're going to do with the house?" Edmund asked, interrupting the flood of memories. "The house?" I frowned. "What would I do with it? I'm going to live there as I've always lived there." I just thought, such a big house for one person. "You and Sylvia always said you'd move somewhere smaller when you retired." Our home in Detroit is a big 6-bedroom Victorian mansion that we bought for next to nothing 30 years ago, when the neighborhood was just starting to revitalize. Sylvia fell in love with its wood paneling, high ceilings, and wide veranda. "Imagine how many children could run through those hallways," she said then. But we never had a second child. The doctors spoke of some complications, the details of which Sylvia never discussed with me. "This was her home, Ed. I don't think I could sell it." Edmund nodded understandingly and sipped from his glass. "How's Vernon? Did you two talk?" I glanced at my son, who was now talking to Hazel Parkinson, our neighbor to the left. An odd choice for a conversation. They'd never socialized much. Hazel, a former flight attendant, had retired 5 years ago and spent most of her time peeking at her neighbors from behind the curtain. Sylvia sometimes dropped in for tea, but I always avoided those visits. "We had a few words," I said. "He's staying a few days to help with the paperwork." Actually, our conversation was much shorter than that. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, son." "I'm sorry." "Me too." And then he turned away to the drinks table. Typical Vernon, always looking for the shortest way to end an unpleasant conversation. He should stay longer, Edmund said. You shouldn't be alone at a time like this. I'm fine, I lied. Serum. Besides, he has a job in Boston. Edmund hummed, but didn't say anything. We both knew that Vernon had never had a real job, just projects he called startups, which were more like houses of cards. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Vernon hastily jotting something down on his phone, while Hazel continued to talk, gesturing vigorously. Something about this scene seemed wrong, out of place. My son has never been known for his patience, especially with the elderly. Sylvia often reproached him for it. Vernon, why can't you just listen to Mrs. Bloomfield? She's just lonely. Larry, if you need anything, call any time. Edmund squeezed my shoulder. Martha will always be glad to have you here. Thank you, friend. The wake went on for a couple more hours. I mechanically thanked people for their condolences, answered questions about my well-being, and nodded at offers of help. Mentally, I was far away, remembering our last trip with Sylvia last year. Michigan, a small lake house. She wasn't feeling well anymore, but she had insisted on this trip. I want to see the sunset over the water, she said then. Her diagnosis sounded like a verdict. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Doctors gave 3 months. She lived 7. Always been stubborn, I said at her bedside on her last day. She smiled and whispered, someone had to keep you in line all these years. When the last guests had dispersed, I found Vernon in the study, rummaging through my desk drawers. What are you looking for? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He flinched and quickly closed the drawer. Mom's papers. She said she had a will. Her lawyer has it, I answered. Warbus. I have his card somewhere. And the insurance? She said she had life insurance. Sylvia never took out life insurance, I interrupted. You know how she felt about it. I don't want my death to be a source of income, she used to say. Vernon pressed his lips together and nodded. Of course. I was just thinking, the funeral, the medical bills. I paid for everything, I said, feeling the irritation rising inside. Your mother and I have enough savings. He looked disappointed, but quickly put a neutral expression on his face. All right, Dad. I just wanted to help. The best help is cleaning the house after the wake, I said, heading for the door. I'm going to go lie down. It had been a long day. As I walked up the stairs, I heard Vernon quietly close the study door. Something was wrong. In my 50-plus years as a prosecutor, I'd learned to sense when people weren't telling the truth. Sylvia called it my lie detector. Now that detector was going crazy. My bedroom greeted me with an oppressive silence. The bed was neatly made, the work of the cleaning lady, and on Sylvia's bedside table there was still a book she hadn't finished reading. Jane Austen, Emma. The bookmark froze on page 230. I sat on the edge of the bed and ran my hand over her pillow. The smell of her chamomile shampoo still hung in the air. Taking off my tie and shoes, I stretched out on top of the bedspread. For the first time in months, I had no urgent things to do, no medications to give on schedule, no calls to the doctors, no comforting a crying Sylvia at 3 in the morning when the pain became unbearable. Emptiness, a freedom I hadn't asked for. I dozed off, but was awakened by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Vernon. He was saying something on the phone, his voice lowered, but sounds travel in strange ways in an old house. Oh, I found the documents, but there's something else I need to check. Yes, I understand. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Look, this is not a phone call. Let's do it tomorrow, like we agreed. I tensed, listening, but Vernon had already changed to a whisper and then closed the door of his room. What was he up to? Who was he talking to? The fatigue set in, and I decided to put those questions off until tomorrow. I woke up at dusk, disoriented and with a headache. The clock read almost 9 in the evening. I'd slept for almost 5 hours, the longest rest I'd had in months. The house was steeped in silence. Going down to the kitchen, I found a note from Vernon. Met up with an old friend. I'll be back late. Don't wait up. Avi. The refrigerator was filled with containers of food, gifts from sympathetic neighbors and friends. I wasn't hungry, but I forced myself to heat up the casserole Martha Pickering had brought. Sylvia always insisted on proper nutrition. Larry, you're 77, not 17. You can't eat sandwiches. Now I was on my own, and the thought caused a sudden panic attack. After digging into my food, I decided to check out Sylvia's room. We'd been sleeping separately for the past 3 months. She was more comfortable in the remodeled study on the first floor, closer to the bathroom. I'd avoided going in there since her death, but something in Vernon's conversation made me break that rule. The room looked almost pristine. The medical bed, the bedside table with medications I wouldn't need anymore, the chair where I'd spent nights holding her hand. But something was wrong. I looked around more closely and realized the jewelry box on the dresser was gone. The small wooden box with mother-of-pearl inlays that I'd given Sylvia for our 20th wedding anniversary. When I opened the closet, I discovered another missing item. The leather folder of important documents that Sylvia always kept on the top shelf was missing. There were our marriage certificates, the deeds to the house, insurance policies, my will. A chill ran down my spine. Why would Vernon want those documents? What did that strange phone conversation mean? I remembered his conversation with Hazel at the wake, his atypical interest in the elderly neighbor. What could she have told him? Back in the bedroom, I sat on the bed and allowed myself to cry for the first time that day. Not just because of Sylvia, though the pain of losing her was acute and all-consuming. I cried because of the estrangement between my son and me, because of the suspicions that should never arise between close people, because even on the day of his mother's funeral, I couldn't trust him. You were always too hard on him, Sylvia had said. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps if I'd been a different father, gentler, more understanding, Vernon would have been a different son. But now, looking at the empty places where Sylvia's things should have been, I felt only bitterness and suspicion. I decided that tomorrow I would talk to Hazel, find out what she and Vernon were talking about. In the meantime, I could only wait for my son's return and wonder what he was up to on the day we buried his mother. The morning after the funeral greeted me with emptiness and silence. I lay staring at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the house. During our 53 years together, I had grown accustomed to waking to the sound of Sylvia's light footsteps in the hallway, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the soft purring of an old tune. The house was silent now, as if it too was mourning her departure. Forcing myself to get up, I pulled on my robe and went downstairs. Vernon was in the kitchen, already fully dressed and organized, with a cup of coffee and a laptop in front of him. He pulled himself away from the screen and nodded at me. "Good morning, Dad. The coffee's fresh." "Thanks." I reached for the cup, trying not to show surprise at his early presence. "What time did you get back last night?" "Around midnight." Vernon stared at the screen again. "I didn't want to wake you." I noticed the papers spread out on the table. Some of the papers from Sylvia's missing folder. There were our house deeds and some bank statements. "What are you studying?" I asked as casually as possible. Vernon quickly stacked the papers. "I'm just going through my mom's inheritance. I need to figure out which accounts need to be closed, which documents need to be updated. Just the usual red tape." "Sure, I could do it myself," I said, feeling my irritation rising. "After all, I'm a lawyer." "Ex-lawyer," Vernon corrected with a slight smile. "And you always said yourself that family law wasn't your specialty. Besides, you need your rest now." I sipped my coffee, hiding my dislike. Sylvia had always chided me for not knowing how to accept help. "You don't have to do everything in the world yourself, Larry," she used to say. Maybe Vernon is really just trying to help. "Did you find your mother's jewelry box?" I asked directly. "And her leather file folder?" Vernon froze for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I put them in the safe in the study. Thought it best to keep valuables in a safe place." "In the safe," I repeated, remembering that I'd never given him the combination. "How did you open it?" My mom gave me the code last year," he said, not looking me in the eye. "She said someone else should know how to open it, just in case." It sounded plausible. Sylvia had always been a practical woman, but something about Vernon's behavior kept bothering me. Maybe it was the way he avoided looking directly at me, or the nervous tapping of his fingers on the table, a gesture he'd inherited from me that always showed up when he was tense. "I'm going to stop by Hazel's," I said, finishing my coffee. "She made the casserole for us yesterday, and I need to return the dishes." "I can carry it myself," Vernon offered quickly. "You don't have to worry about little things like that." It's no trouble to me, I objected. Besides, I could use the fresh air. Vernon shrugged, but I could see his shoulders tense. Something was definitely wrong. After I showered and dressed, I headed toward Hazel's house, grabbing an empty glass casserole dish. The morning was cool but clear. Autumn leaves swirled in the wind, carpeting the sidewalks in a golden carpet. Sylvia loved fall. A time of change, she said. Hazel opened the door after the second bell rang. Her gray hair was gathered into a neat bun, and a welcoming smile played on her face. "Lawrence, darling, come in, come in. I was just making tea." I reluctantly followed her into the living room, which was littered with porcelain figurines and framed photographs. Most depicted a young Hazel in her stewardess uniform, next to various landmarks of the world. "Thank you for the casserole," I said, holding out the dishes to her. It was delicious. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You must eat well, especially now." She put a cup of tea in front of me. "How are you holding up?" "All right," I lied. "Day by day." Hazel nodded understandingly. "That's the right approach. After my George died, I did the same thing, just trying to get through each day." I nodded politely, not knowing how to move on to the topic I was interested in. Hazel, however, relieved me of that necessity. "Your son seems very thoughtful," she said, stirring her tea. "He spent so much time at your house while you were busy preparing for the funeral, making sure everything was in order." I tensed. "Yes, Vernon is very attentive, Nick. And those nice people he brought in, they must have been support staff, very professional looking, with briefcases and everything." I put the cup on the table, trying not to show my surprise. "People? What people, Hazel?" She furrowed her brow. "Well, the two men who came in, God forbid I remember, last Thursday, and then again on Friday, I think. They went around the house for a long time, taking notes. I thought maybe they were insurance adjusters or something. Last Thursday and Friday. That's when I was at the funeral home picking out a casket and discussing the details of the ceremony. Vernon said he had to work from home, and I didn't pay much attention to it. And did they talk about anything in particular?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I don't eavesdrop, you know that." Hazel smiled embarrassedly, but her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "But the windows were open, and I overheard them discussing the value of the house. One of them said something like, 'Even with the state of the market, it's still a great offer.' And your son seemed very pleased." A chill ran down my spine. Appraisers on the house? An offer? What was Vernon up to? Saturautur. "And yesterday, at the wake, what did you talk to him about?" I asked directly. Hazel looked surprised. "Nothing much. He asked if I'd noticed any strange people around the house lately. Said he was worried about safety, especially now that you'll be living alone." That was very thoughtful of him. I could hardly contain a chuckle. Vernon had never been known for his concern for my safety. It all sounded like an excuse to talk. "And what did you say to him?" "That the only outsiders were the two men he'd brought in himself." Hazel leaned closer. "You know, Lawrence, if you're planning to sell the house, I'd understand. Too many memories, it must be hard." "I don't plan on selling the house," I cut off sharper than I intended. Hazel recoiled, clearly hurt by my tone. "Of course, darling. I was just thinking." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "No, I'm sorry, Hazel. It's just that this whole thing complicated right now." She patted my arm sympathetically. "I get it. Believe me, I do." We talked a little more about nothing. The weather, Hazel's plans to visit her sister in Florida, the new neighbors across the street, but my thoughts were far away. I tried to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Vernon's interest in the deeds to the house, the strange visitors, his conversations on the phone. Returning home, I found Vernon in his study. He'd closed his laptop as soon as I walked in. Another alarming sign. "How's Hazel?" he asked with feigned nonchalance. "Fine," I answered, deciding not to reveal my cards just yet. "She sends her love." I walked over to the safe built into the wall behind the painting. It was old-fashioned with a mechanical lock, something Sylvia had insisted on, not trusting electronics. "Show me your mother's jewelry," I said, turning to Vernon. "And the papers." He tensed visibly. "Now?" "I'm just working on an important project." "Now," I repeated firmly. It won't take long if everything is in place as you say. Vernon reluctantly got up and walked over to the safe. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the combination. The door opened with a quiet click. Inside, I saw Sylvia's jewelry box and the familiar leather folder. But there was something else, an envelope I hadn't seen before. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to the envelope. Vernon tried to block it with his hand. "Just work papers. Nothing important." I pushed his hand away and pulled out the envelope. Inside were papers with the logo of Prime Realty, a real estate company I'd never heard of. I quickly ran my eyes over the document and felt my back grow cold. It was a preliminary agreement to sell the house, with Vernon's name as the seller. What the hell does that mean? I raised my eyes to my son, barely containing my anger. Vernon took a step back, his face pale. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what? That you're trying to sell a house behind my back? A house that doesn't even belong to you?" "Technically, after Mom died, I own half of the house," Vernon said, straightening up and trying to speak confidently. "I consulted a lawyer. According to state law—" "To hell with state law." I threw the papers on the table. "We're talking about your mother's house, the house you grew up in, and you decided to sell it without even asking me, while I was organizing her funeral?" Vernon clenched his fists. "When would you have listened to me, Dad? When would you have really considered what I was saying? You always thought you knew better, always dismissed my ideas." "What ideas? Selling your parents' house? What a brilliant idea." "This house is too big for one person," Vernon exclaimed. "You're 77 years old. You can't live here alone. The stairs, the cleaning, the upkeep. It's impractical." I grinned bitterly. "Oh, so that's taking care of me? Not the money you'll get from the sale?" Vernon's face contorted with anger. "Yes, about the money too. Do you know how much this house is worth now? Even with the necessary repairs, it's at least $1 million. Half of it is mine by right. Or did you think you'd sit here for the rest of your life, and then I'd get a dilapidated ruin that no one would buy?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. I remembered how Sylvia and I had worked on this house painting, the walls, changing the floors, organizing the garden. How we'd rejoiced at every little improvement. How we dreamed that one day our grandchildren would be running around here. "You've always been like this," I said quietly. "Always looking for the easy way out, the quick buck. Never appreciated what you had." "Oh, here we go," Vernon rolled his eyes. "This is going to be a lecture on how I disappointed the great Lawrence Blackwell. How I failed to live up to expectations. How I failed to become a clone of my flawless father." "I never expected you to be my clone," I objected. "I just hoped you'd grow up to be a decent person." Vernon laughed bitterly, wryly. "Decent? By your standards?" "Your standards broke our family, Dad. Your obsession with principles and rules. Your inability to recognize that sometimes rules need to be broken." I remembered that long ago day when Vernon came home with a black eye. He was 14. "I fought back, Dad," he said proudly. "That kid won't tease Eric about his stutter anymore." I told him off then. "Violence doesn't solve anything," I said. "You should have gone to the teachers." He looked at me with such disappointment, and Sylvia whispered to me later, "You were too harsh. He did the right thing, protecting his friend." "I always wanted the best for you," I said, feeling my throat constrict from unshed tears. "No," Vernon shook his head. "You wanted me to be better. That's not the same thing." We stood across from each other, two strangers, bound by blood, but separated by years of misunderstanding and resentment. I remembered all the times I could have done things differently, shown more understanding, less judgment. When Vernon brought home a bad grade in math when he was 10, and I made him do problems all Sunday instead of going to the movies with his friends. When at 16 he said he wanted to be a musician, and I ridiculed the idea as unrealistic. When at 22 he dropped out of law school after his first year, and I didn't speak to him for 2 months. Sylvia was always between us. Buffer, translator, peacemaker. "Larry, you should try to understand his point of view," she'd say. "Vernon, your father is just worried about your future. Without her, we were like two aliens without an interpreter." "I'm not signing any sale papers," I finally said. "Don't even think about it." Vernon clenched his jaw. "You don't have a choice. If you refuse, I'll sue for partition of the property. You know that by law, I said. By law, I interrupted. The sale requires my consent because I'm a co-owner, and I won't consent while I'm alive. It can be arranged, Vernon muttered under his breath, but loud enough for me to hear. I jerked back, startled. Had my own son just... What did you say? I asked, not believing my ears. Vernon turned pale, realizing what he had said. Nothing. I didn't mean it, it just came out. But the words were already in the air, poisonous and inescapable. Get out of my house, I said quietly. Now. Dad, get out! I shouted, feeling something inside me tearing. Pack your things and get out. Vernon looked at me with a mixture of anger and fear, remorse. I couldn't read his expression. Then he turned and left the room, slamming the door. I sank into the chair, feeling my hands shaking. 53 years I'd spent working with criminals, but I'd never thought my own son would wish me dead, even in a moment of anger. What did I do wrong? Where had I made a mistake? You always expected him to be perfect, Sylvia would say. You never showed him that you loved him for who he was. I heard the closet door slam upstairs. Vernon was packing. Suddenly I felt very old and very tired. Maybe he was right. Maybe the house really is too big for me alone. Maybe it would be more practical to sell it, to buy something smaller. But it wasn't about practicality. It was about the memories that lived within these walls, in the smell of Sylvia's chamomile shampoo that still lingered in the bedroom, in the markings of Vernon's height on the kitchen door jamb, in the creak of the third step we'd never fixed. I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Vernon was coming down with a suitcase. I didn't go out to see him off. The front door slammed, followed by the sound of the engine starting. Vernon's rented car pulled away from the house. Only then did I allow myself to cry for my wife, whom I would never see again, for the son I might lose forever, and for myself, the man who, in trying to create the perfect family, had destroyed it with his own hands. After the fight with Vernon, I spent a restless night. Sleep came intermittently, interrupted by memories of our conversation and thoughts of Sylvia. What would she say if she saw us like this? She was always hurt by our conflicts. Your family, she kept saying. Is it so hard to find common ground? It turned out it couldn't be without her. The morning of the day of the funeral was overcast, with low clouds that threatened to rain any minute. Perfect weather for a farewell. I put on my best suit, the one I wore when Sylvia and I celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary. It hung looser on me than before. I'd lost about 10 pounds in the last few months caring for her day and night. The funeral service was scheduled for 11 o'clock at St. Michael's Church, where Sylvia and I had been married 53 years ago. The circle had closed, where we had promised to be together till death do us part. We were now saying goodbye forever. I thought Vernon wouldn't show up after our conversation yesterday, but he did, impeccably dressed, stone-faced. We stood on opposite sides of the coffin, avoiding looking at each other. Those present must have written it off as grief. The priest spoke of a good woman who had lived a righteous life, a loving wife and mother, a soul who had found rest in the arms of the Lord. Standard phrases that couldn't convey who Sylvia really was. The way she laughed with her head tilted back, how she read poetry aloud on Saturday nights, how she could soothe me with a touch of her hand when I came home, furious at the injustice of another judgment. After the service, the small procession moved to the cemetery. It was still raining, a fine, penetrating rain that made the umbrellas duck in the gusts of wind. I stood watching the coffin being lowered and felt empty inside. A part of me was going underground with it. Vernon stood in the distance, hiding under a black umbrella. He hadn't shed a tear during the ceremony, but I noticed his shoulders shaking when the first clod of earth hit the coffin lid. Maybe at that moment he finally realized that his mother was truly gone forever. After the funeral, it was suggested that we go to a restaurant nearby for a wake, but I declined. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting around a table making small talk and pretending that life went on. Edmund offered me a ride home. "Are you sure you want to be alone, Larry?" he asked, pulling up in front of my house. Martha would be happy to have you stay with us for a few days." "Thanks, friend, but no," I smiled weakly. "I need to be alone with my memories." Edmund nodded understandingly. He'd lost his first wife almost 20 years ago before he met Martha. Call me if you need anything. Anytime. I walked up the porch steps, feeling every year of my age in my aching joints. The house greeted me with silence. No sound of footsteps, no rustling of book pages, no Sylvia humming softly. Only the ticking of the old floor clock in the living room, a housewarming gift from my parents. I took off my wet coat and walked into the kitchen to make myself some tea. On the table was a folded sheet of paper with my name on it, written in Vernon's sharp handwriting. Next to it was an envelope. My heart clenched with a bad feeling. I unfolded the note. Dad, I'm sorry things turned out this way. Mom always wanted us to get along, but apparently some things can't be fixed. I found a buyer for the house. Mom's will leaves me half of the property, and I have the legal right to dispose of my share. The deeds are properly executed, with a power of attorney in your name, which I prepared in advance. It's legally clean. It's better for everyone. The house is too big for you. It needs maintenance and repairs. The money from the sale will allow you to move to a nice place with supervision and for me to finally get on with my business without constant part-time work. I hope someday you'll realize I'm not doing this out of spite. Vernon. I reread the note 3 times, unable to believe what was written. A power of attorney? A sale? How was that possible? With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of the sales contract, signed by Vernon on his own behalf and mine. On the last page was the sum of $400,000. I gasped in indignation. The house was worth at least twice that, even with the necessary repairs. Attached to the contract was a copy of the power of attorney I'd supposedly given Vernon to sell the property. My signature was at the bottom, but it wasn't my hand. An obvious forgery, though skillful enough to fool a man unfamiliar with my handwriting. My lower belly clenched with fear and anger. My own son forged my signature and sold our house for nothing, the day of his mother's funeral. I grabbed the phone and dialed Vernon's number. It rang, but no one answered. After the 5th ring, it went to voicemail. Vernon, it's your father, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I found your note and the paperwork. It's a scam, and you know it. Call me immediately. I threw the phone on the table and sank down in my chair, feeling my legs shake. How could he do this? How could he go to such lengths? A thought flashed through my mind about those strangers Hazel had seen. They must have been buyers, not appraisers. Vernon had shown them the house while I was busy making funeral arrangements for my wife, planning ahead, waiting for the moment. I called him again, same result. Then I wrote a message. Vernon, I know what you did. It's a felony. We need to talk now. A few minutes later, the phone rang. A reply came back from Vernon, but not the one I had hoped for. Goodbye, old fart. Enjoy your last days in a house that was never really home. I stared at the screen, not believing my eyes. That's not my son. It couldn't be. I called back. The phone was already disconnected. With shaking hands, I went through the paperwork again. The closing date was in 2 weeks. The buyer's name was Turbo Property LLC, some company I'd never heard of. And the amount was $400,000 for a house worth at least $1 million. Suddenly it hit me. Vernon must have gotten a down payment, probably a substantial one. And knowing his habits, he'd already spent the money or invested it in another dubious scheme. I called Edmund Pickering, my old friend and colleague. If anyone could help in this situation, it was him. Ed, I need your help, I said when he answered. It's an emergency. I briefly explained the situation, trying to speak coherently, though my voice was trembling. Oh my God, Larry, Edmund breathed out after a pause. Are you sure this isn't some kind of misunderstanding? Absolutely. I've got a forged power of attorney with my signature on it and a contract to sell the house for half its real value. What about Sylvia's will? He mentions that he inherited half the house. I stammered. Yeah, I haven't seen the will. Sylvia never discussed the details of it with me. All right, Edmund said firmly. The first thing to do is to contact that company, Turbo Property, and tell them about the fraud. If the deal was finalized today, there's a chance it can still be stopped. I found Turbo Property's number in the attached documents and dialed it. After a few rings, a man with a deep voice answered the phone. Sorry, Turbo Property, Patrick Limbaugh speaking. Mr. Limbaugh, my name is Lawrence Blackwell. I'm calling about the purchase and sale of a house on Oak Street that my son, Vernon Blackwell, allegedly entered into. Ah, Mr. Blackwell. The voice on the other end of the line was visibly tense. I'm glad you called. We just had some questions about this deal. What kind of questions? I asked, feeling a glimmer of hope. You see, the asking price seems unrealistically low for a property of this type in this neighborhood. Also, my colleague who inspected the house noted that there is an elderly man living there, I assume that's you, who, according to your son, will be moving into a nursing home soon. That's not exactly in line with normal practice. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Achu, Mr. Limbaugh, I did not authorize the sale of the house. I didn't sign the power of attorney. My signature was forged. I demand that this transaction be stopped immediately. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I understand, Limbaugh finally said. In that case, of course, the deal cannot be finalized, but we have a problem. What kind of problem? We've already paid your son a deposit, 15% of the deal. A deposit? I asked, feeling the blood drain from my face. How much exactly? $60,000. I cursed quietly. $60,000 was a lot of money. And knowing Vernon, he'd already spent it, or planned to. Mr. Blackwell, Limbaugh continued, I'm sorry, but if your son doesn't return the deposit, we're going to have to file a fraud report with the police. I understand, I said. Adrian, give me a little time to get in touch with him. Of course, Limbaugh agreed, but I must warn you that we have a deadline. If the money is not returned by the end of the week, we will be forced to act. After the conversation, I tried to contact Vernon again, to no avail. His phone was disconnected. Then I wrote him an email explaining the situation and warning him of the possible consequences. We can resolve this as a family or it will go to the police and court. The choice is yours. I sat in the kitchen going through papers and trying to make sense of what was happening. My own son, the man I'd raised, the man I'd read books to before bed, the man I'd taught to ride a bike. How could he betray me so cruelly? My phone beeped for a new message. I grabbed it, hoping it was a reply from Vernon. It was, but the message wasn't what I was hoping for. Already at the airport, flying out. Money? What money? I don't know what you mean. The deal's off? That's great. Then I'm free of all obligations. Enjoy your decrepit house, old man, and don't try to find me. Attached to the message was a photo. Vernon in the departure area of the airport, ticket in hand, smiling for the camera. Judging by the scoreboard behind him, he was about to fly to Miami. I felt despair overwhelm me. My son is flying away, avoiding responsibility. $60,000 stolen, and I'm left to deal with the consequences. My first impulse was to call the police right away, report the fraud, the forgery, the theft. But something held me back. Perhaps the remnants of a father's love, or the memory of Sylvia, who would never have approved of such a move. Instead, I started gathering information. I double-checked all the documents Vernon had left behind, examined a copy of the power of attorney. It was notarized by a notary, one Rachel Pearson, whom I'd never heard of. Googled her name and found that her license had been revoked 3 months ago for misconduct. Then I moved on to Sylvia's will, a copy of which was also in the envelope. It did leave Vernon half the house and 30% of our combined savings, but nowhere did it say anything about the right to sell the house without my consent. Then I turned my attention to the buying company, Turbo Property LLC. An internet search revealed that it was a relatively new firm specializing in quick real estate transactions. We buy distressed homes for cash, was their slogan. Typical overbidders profiting from other people's problems. I wrote all these facts down, gathering evidence of Vernon's fraud. Part of me still hoped it was some terrible misunderstanding, that he'd come to his senses and come back to make things right. But the other part, a prosecutor with 50 years of experience, realized that was unlikely. The phone rang. It was Edmund. Sequintronum. Larry, I found out something about Sylvia's will, he said without preamble. I've been in touch with Warbus, her lawyer. The will does exist, and Vernon does inherit half the house. But Warbus says that Sylvia changed the will very recently, just 2 weeks before she died. The whole house used to go to you. She never told me that, I whispered. Warbus said she was very weak that day, and that Vernon was with her when she signed the papers. I felt my back grow cold. Could Vernon really have influenced his dying mother to change the will in his favor? How far had his lust for profit gone? What am I supposed to do now, Ed? I asked, feeling my throat tighten as the tears welled up. The first thing to do is to formally notify Turbo Property of the fraud. Then perhaps we should go to the police. And Larry, you need to decide if you want to pursue Vernon legally. This is your son, and only you can make that decision. I thanked my friend and hung up. Then I sat down at my desk and drafted a formal letter to Turbo Property, detailing the situation and attaching evidence of fraud. I sent it by email and registered mail so I could have confirmation of sending it. After that, I went up to my and Sylvia's bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Her pillow still held the faint scent of chamomile shampoo. I imagined what she would say now. Larry, don't be too hard on him. There's a reason for every action. She'd always defended Vernon, even when he didn't deserve it. But what would she say now? After he sold the house the day of her funeral? After possibly manipulating her on her deathbed? Even Sylvia, with her endless patience and love, would be disappointed. I pulled an old photo album from the nightstand, flipped through it, looking at snapshots of our family over the years. Vernon on his first bicycle, Vernon receiving his high school diploma, Vernon with us on our last family vacation 5 years ago at Lake Michigan. We looked happy in all the pictures. Was it a hoax? Or were we really a family until something broke? I never found the answers to those questions, but I knew I had to take the first steps toward finding out the legitimacy of the deal my son was trying to pull, even if those steps could lead to his arrest. After discovering that my house had been sold behind my back, I couldn't just sit back. Age may have made me slow, but years as a prosecutor have taught me to act decisively when faced with injustice, even if that injustice comes from your own son. The morning after Sylvia's funeral, I called Robert Whitman, my longtime colleague and one of the best real estate lawyers in Detroit. In my 77 years, I had made quite a few useful connections, and Bob was one of the most reliable. Bob, I need your help, I said without preamble when he answered. His voice sounded as cheerful as it had 30 years ago, when we'd worked together on the city council corruption case. It's about my house and my son. I summarized the situation, trying to stick to the facts and keep my emotions at bay, though inside I was seething with a mixture of anger, frustration, and yes, pain. The pain of betrayal was most acute. Vernon hadn't just tried to sell the house. He'd done it secretly for next to nothing on the day of his mother's funeral. Oh my God, Larry, Bob breathed out when I finished the story. I don't even know what to say. Are you sure your son wasn't acting under some kind of duress? Maybe he's got debts? Or problems you don't know about? I doubt it, I replied, remembering Vernon's last message. Goodbye, old fart. That doesn't sound like someone acting under duress. More like someone who enjoys his revenge. Anyway, I need to know how legitimate this deal is and what I can do to avoid it. Can you send me copies of the documents? I want to go over everything before I give you any advice. I scanned all the papers Vernon had left and sent them to Bob. Then I sat at the window in the living room, looking out at the deserted yard. Sylvia had always tended the garden, planting tulips in the spring, roses in the summer, chrysanthemums in the fall. Now everything looked neglected, even though it had only been a few months since she'd last gone out to the garden with pruning shears in hand. I remembered how Vernon, then about 10 years old, had once helped her with the plantings. He was soiled from head to toe in the soil, but he was so proud when he showed me his bed of carrots. Look, Dad, I planted it all myself. Back then, he would still look at me with admiration, waiting for approval. When did that change? At what point did admiration change to alienation and then open hostility? The phone rang, interrupting my musings. Larry, I've been going over the paperwork. Bob's voice sounded worried. Yes, and I have some good news and some bad news. Start with the bad, I said. In my long career, I'd gotten used to the fact that the bad news always outweighed the good. Sylvia's will appears to be genuine. She really did leave half the house to Vernon. I checked. It matches the copy I got from Warbus, her attorney. I squeezed the tube a little tighter. So Sylvia really had changed her will without saying a word to me. After 53 years of marriage, she still had secrets from me. And the good news? The power of attorney is an obvious forgery. The notary who certified it, Rachel Pearson, was disbarred 3 months ago for similar fraud. Besides, you were in the hospital with Sylvia on the day the power of attorney was supposedly executed. I checked the records you sent me. You couldn't physically have been at the notary's. I was relieved, so the deal was invalid. But then a new anxiety came over me. What about the buyer? Turbo Property had already paid Vernon the deposit, $60,000. That's a problem, Bob agreed. Not yours, but Vernon's and this company's. You didn't sign any documents. You didn't get any money. You're legally clean. However, he paused and I knew I was about to hear something unpleasant. Your son has committed a felony. Forgery, fraud, maybe even forgery. You could get real time for that. I closed my eyes, picturing Vernon in a prison robe. My only son. The man with my blood in him. How did we get to this point? What do you suggest we do, Bob? The first step is to officially notify Turbo Property that the deal is null and void. I can prepare the necessary paperwork. Then you should file a police report that your signature was forged to protect you in case Turbo Property decides to sue you. Can they? Theoretically, yes, although their chances are minimal. But it's best to be safe. And Larry, Bob sighed, you need to decide if you want to press charges against Vernon. As a lawyer, I advise you to do so. As a friend, I realize how difficult this is. After talking to Bob, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at Sylvia's picture on my desk. She wouldn't have approved of legal action against our son, no matter how horrible his act was. He's our child, Larry, she would say. We have to protect him, even from himself. But Sylvia was gone. And I've always believed in justice, even when it's painful, especially then. I decided to follow Bob's advice. He prepared a formal letter to Turbo Property, detailing the situation and demanding that the deal be canceled immediately. We sent it by courier to make sure it got to its destination. The response came surprisingly quickly. 2 hours later, I received a call from the same Patrick Limbaugh I had spoken to earlier. Mr. Blackwell, his voice sounded strained, we received a letter from your lawyer. I must say that our company is extremely concerned about the situation. We have conducted an internal investigation and have concluded that the transaction was indeed improperly handled. So you admit that it is invalid? I asked, trying to hide the relief in my voice. Yes, absolutely. We have already prepared all the necessary documents for annulment. However, there is still the problem of the deposit. We paid your son $60,000 on the basis of false documents. That money must be returned. I understand, I said, and I will do my best to contact Vernon and convince him to return the money. But I must warn you that he's not returning my calls. We've already tried to contact him ourselves, Limbaugh said. His cell phone is disconnected. Emails go unanswered. Mr. Blackwell, I am compelled to inform you that if the money is not returned within 7 days, we will be forced to file a fraud report with the police. 7 days, I repeated. I was running out of time. I understand your position, Mr. Limbaugh. Thank you for the extension. After the conversation, I immediately called Bob. 7 days isn't very long, he said when I explained the situation, but it's better than nothing. You need to find Vernon. Do you have any idea where he might be? I wondered. Vernon had mentioned Miami in his last message. But was he really there? Or was it a bluff to throw me off the trail? He'd said something about Florida, but I'm not sure. It's worth checking, Bob said. I know a private investigator in Miami. He could look for Vernon there. Do it, I agreed. And Bob, thank you for everything. You're welcome, old man. We'll get out of this situation. I wish I could share his optimism, but my years in the DA's office had taught me that not all stories end well, especially ones that start with betrayal. The next 2 days were spent feverishly trying to find Vernon. I called every friend I knew, checked every place he might be staying in Detroit. Bob had his detective in Florida, but so far no luck. On the third day the phone rang. An unfamiliar number popped up on the screen. I answered with bated breath. Larry Blackwell speaking. Mr. Blackwell, this is Alicia Wong from Turbo Properties Legal Department, came a woman's voice. I have some news about your son. I straightened in my chair. Did you find him? No, but he contacted us, Alicia replied, about an hour ago. Apparently he found out about the deal being canceled. What did he say? He was, upset. When we told him we had to return the deposit, he started yelling that he didn't have that kind of money. And then, she paused. He said it was over and he didn't care. I felt my back grow cold. That sounded disturbing. Do you have the number he called from? I asked. Yes, of course, Alicia dictated the number to me, which I immediately wrote down. As soon as the conversation was over, I dialed the number. After 3 rings, Vernon's voice sounded, "Who is it?" "Vernon, it's Dad," I said, trying to speak calmly. "We need to talk." "How did you get this number?" His voice sounded distant, almost lifeless. "It doesn't matter. Turbo Property canceled the deal and wants the deposit back. If you don't, they'll go to the police." "Let them," he replied. "I don't have that money." "Vernon, this is serious. We're talking about a felony." "You think I don't know that?" The emotion finally came out in his voice. Bitterness, despair. "I blew it, Dad. You always do. Money spent. Debts, you know. I owed someone. Serious people who don't mess around with debts." I felt my heart clench. So it wasn't about greed or revenge. Vernon was desperate. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "I could have helped." Vernon laughed bitterly. "To you? To the man who always thought I was a loser? Who never tired of reminding me how I didn't live up to his expectations?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. Was I really that kind of father? "Vernon, let's meet," I said after a pause. "Let's talk in person. Maybe together we can find a way out." "There is no way out." His voice became lifeless again. "The money's spent. The deal's off. I'm going to jail. It's over." "Don't say that," I felt panic overwhelm me. "We can solve this problem. I have savings. I could—" "No." Vernon interrupted me sharply. "I'm not taking your money. Not after everything that's been said. You kicked me out of the house, remember? I was angry," I admitted. "But this isn't about that now. It's about your future." "So, I don't have a future," Vernon said quietly. "At least not the kind you'd want for me. I've always been a disappointment, haven't I? The eternal disappointment of the great Lawrence Blackwell." "Vernon, that's not true." "Never mind," he interrupted me. "What's done is done. I can't give the money back, and I can't undo what I've done." "Tell me where you are," I asked. "I'll come over. We'll talk." "No, Dad. Goodbye." The line went dead. I called back immediately, but the phone was already off. I sat clutching the receiver in my hand, feeling panic rising up inside me in a wave. It sounded like a goodbye, a final one. I immediately called Bob, telling him about my conversation with Vernon. He promised to contact his police contacts immediately to try and trace the phone. I then called every hotel and motel in Detroit asking about Vernon Blackwell. At my 4th motel, a cheap diner on the outskirts of the city, I got lucky. "Yes, we have a guest," the desk clerk said. "Number 7. But I haven't seen him since this morning." I left immediately, calling Edmund Pickering, an old friend of mine from the police. He promised to meet me there. When I got to the motel, Edmund was already waiting for me in the parking lot. His face was serious. "The receptionist says she heard some noise coming from Vernon's room about an hour ago," he said. And then silence. We walked quickly to room 7. I knocked on the door. "Vernon? It's Dad. Please open up." Silence. I knocked harder. "Vernon, I know you're in there." No answer. I exchanged glances with Edmund. He nodded and called for the receptionist with a spare key. When the door opened, we were confronted with a scene of utter devastation. Broken bottles on the floor, overturned furniture, fist marks on the walls. On the bed was a note. "Dad, if you're reading this, you found me. But it's too late. I messed up as usual. The money's spent. The deal's off. Turbo Property is demanding the deposit back, which I don't have. Don't come looking for me. I need time to think things over. Maybe start over somewhere where no one knows me, where there won't be the shadow of the great Lawrence Blackwell that I've always lived in. I know you'll never forgive me for what I tried to do, and I won't forgive myself. It was despicable even by my standards. But I was desperate. These people I owed money to. They're not the kind of people who give reprieves. Forgive me if you can. And forgive me for not being the son you deserve. Vernon." I read the note twice, feeling dread overwhelm me. Where is he? What is he going to do? "His stuff is still here," Edmund remarked, pointing to a suitcase in the corner of the room. So he wasn't planning on going far away. At least not right away. I looked around, trying to find some clue as to where he might have gone. There was his cell phone on the table. Obviously, he'd left it on purpose so it couldn't be traced. Next to it was an empty wallet and a ticket, a bus ticket to Chicago for tonight. He's going to leave, I said, showing the ticket to Edmund. Tonight, in 3 hours. Then we need to go to the bus station, Edmund said firmly. Right now. On the way to the bus station, I couldn't stop thinking about what Vernon had said, that he'd always lived in my shadow, that I was never satisfied with him, that he was a perpetual disappointment. Did I really make him feel that way? Did my demanding, my drive to make him better than me, really ruin him? The Detroit bus station was full of people rushing about their business. Edmund and I split up to take a quick look at all the waiting areas, and that's when I saw him. Vernon was sitting on a bench in the farthest corner of the hall, hunched over, staring at the floor. He looked gaunt, aged. His brown hair, just like Sylvia's, had more gray in it than I remembered. I approached him slowly, not wanting to frighten him away. "Vernon," I called softly. He raised his head. His eyes were red from sleep or tears, or maybe both. "Dad." He looked surprised. "How did you find me?" "I found your motel ticket," I answered, sitting down next to him. "Vernon, we need to talk." He turned away, staring off into the distance. "There's nothing to talk about." I blew it, as usual. "Turbo Property wants their money back," I said bluntly. $60,000. "I don't have it," Vernon answered, still not looking at me. "I already told you. It's spent." "On what?" "Sorry, debts." He finally turned to me. "I owed money to the wrong people, Dad. They threatened me, and Mom, before she died." I felt a chill go down my spine. "Sylvia? They threatened Sylvia?" Vernon nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "They came to see her at the hospital. Said that if I didn't pay up, they'd—" He swallowed, unable to finish the sentence. I was desperate. When the opportunity came to get the money quickly through the sale of the house— "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked, feeling a wave of grief and anger rising inside me. "Why didn't you tell me about those threats?" "You wouldn't have believed me," Vernon answered bitterly. "You never believed me when I told you I was in trouble. You always thought I was exaggerating, looking for excuses. He stammered. "I didn't want you to know what kind of shit I was in. I looked at my son, broken, scared, cornered, and I saw not a criminal, but a little boy who had once looked at me with adoration long ago, who believed his father could protect him from everything. Vernon, listen to me." I put my hand on his shoulder. "We'll get through this together. I'll help you get Turbo Properties' money back. And we'll find a way to resolve the problem with your creditors." He looked at me with disbelief. "Why would you want to help me, after everything I've done?" "Because you're my son," I answered simply. "And because I think I bear some of the blame for what you've become." For the first time in the entire conversation, something resembling hope appeared in Vernon's eyes. But then his face darkened again. "You don't understand, Dad. These people, they're not kidding. They're waiting for their money. The whole deposit went to pay off part of the debt, but it's not enough. They gave me an extension, counting on the rest of the money from the sale of the house. Now the deal's off, and I'm finished." "Who are these people?" I asked. "I want to know everything, Vernon." He looked at me for a long time, as if deciding whether I could be trusted. Then he took a deep breath and began to tell me. At the Detroit bus station, sitting next to Vernon on a plastic bench, I felt decades of reticence weighing heavily on us. My son looked older, broken, more gray in his brown hair than I remembered, and deep wrinkles around his eyes. "I'm not running away," he said finally, tucking the ticket to Chicago into his pocket. "Not today, anyway." Edmund, who had spotted us from a distance, stepped aside tactfully to give us a chance to talk alone. He always knew when to back off. That's why he'd been my best friend all these years. "We need to talk, Vernon." I tried to keep my voice calm, though my insides were seething with a mixture of relief, anger, and pain. "Not here. Let's go home." "That house?" He grimaced. "I know. Where I'd always been told I wasn't good enough for the Blackwell family name?" "No thanks." "Then where to?" Vernon shrugged, looking somewhere past me. "A motel? A cafe? Whatever. Just the wrong place." We stopped at the nearest diner, a small all-night cafe with a cracked neon sign and worn sofas. We got coffee. Vernon sat across from me, hunched over, staring at his hands on the table. Hands with calluses and scratches, not the hands of a man who only did startups, as he always said, the hands of a man who worked hard physically. So, I began, not knowing how to approach what had happened. Now what? Vernon looked up, tired, reddened from sleep deprivation or tears. Now? Now Turbo Property will file a police report. I'll be arrested for fraud, and I'll spend the next few years in jail. And when I get out, if I get out, the people I owe will be waiting for me with open arms and baseball bats. He spoke as calmly as if he had accepted his fate. It scared me more than his anger or his despair. Who are these men, Vernon? I asked him straight out. To whom do you owe a debt? He stared at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust me with this information. Then he took a deep breath. Remember Owen Kramer? I frowned, going over the names in my mind. That guy you went to high school with? The one who was always getting into trouble? Vernon nodded. He's a big shot now in the local, well, let's call it an informal lending organization. Gives money to people the normal banks won't give to, at interest rates that no law would approve of. And you took money from him, was not the question. 200,000, Vernon said quietly, but every word hit like a hammer. For my latest project, an online real estate investment platform, seemed like a win-win. But it went wrong. I already knew where it was going. Vernon grinned bitterly. When had anything in my life ever gone as planned? The market crashed, investors backed out of deals. And Owen, he's not the type to take sorry for an apology. And that's why you decided to sell the house. Now it was all coming together. Not just greed or revenge, desperation. Yes, Vernon lowered his eyes. After Mom died, I found out I'd inherited half of it. I thought it was my chance to get out. A quick sale, even if it was underpriced, 60,000 down payment would buy me some time. Why didn't you come to me? That was the question that pained me the most. I'm your father, Vernon. I could have helped. He looked up, and there was a pain in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. Help? He asked with a bitter chuckle. You never helped me, Dad. You criticized. You judged. You compared me to yourself and always found me inadequate. His words hit me like a slap in the face. Was I really that kind of father? I just wanted what was best for you, I said quietly. I wanted you not to make the same mistakes I did. No, Vernon shook his head. You wanted the perfect son, a little copy of yourself. But I was never you, Dad, and I never will be. We fell silent. The waitress came over to refill our coffee, and we were both grateful for the pause, for the chance to collect our thoughts. Do you remember my high school graduation? Vernon asked suddenly. I nodded, not sure what he was getting at. Do you remember what you said to me when I showed you my honor certificate? I frowned, trying to remember that day 24 years ago. I think I congratulated you. You said, not bad, but I was also captain of the soccer team when I was your age. Vernon said the words with such precision, as if they were burned into his memory. Not, I'm proud of you, son. Not, good job, you did well. But a comparison I was, as usual, losing at. I opened my mouth to object, but the words stuck in my throat. Because maybe he was right. Hadn't I been comparing him to myself his whole life? Hadn't I measured him against me? And then there was college, Vernon continued. Remember what happened when I said I wanted to study art instead of law? I remembered. Of course you do. Our first really serious conflict. I was worried about your future, I tried to explain. I wanted you to have a stable profession. You called my dream a whim. Vernon's voice trembled. Said I was throwing my life away. You know what Mom did after you left? Hugged me and said, follow your heart, Vernon. I'll support you no matter what you choose. Sylvia was always softer than me, I sighed. Perhaps too soft. Vernon grinned bitterly. See? You still don't get it. It's not about softness. It's about unconditional love. She loved me for who I was. And you always loved who you thought I was supposed to be. I sat there stunned by his words. How many years had passed, and we had never learned to really listen to each other. And yet, I said after a long pause, none of this explains why you didn't come to me with the debt problem, why you chose to go behind my back. Vernon looked away, as if he didn't want to say what he was about to say. Because I knew you'd say no, or worse, agree to help, but you'd remind me of it for the rest of my life. Every conversation would turn into, remember when I saved you from the creditors? Every Christmas, every birthday. I would never pay off that debt, not financially, but morally. I wanted to object, but I couldn't, because somewhere deep down inside, I knew he was right. Didn't I love reminding people of their mistakes? Didn't I keep every transgression in my memory to use at the right moment? But there was another reason, Vernon continued, and there was something new in his voice, a determination, as if he'd finally decided to say what he'd wanted to say for a long time. A reason you don't know about, or you'd rather not know. What are you talking about? Vernon looked me straight in the eye, a challenge in his gaze. About your promise, the promise you made to me before I went to college. Remember? I racked my brain. It was a difficult time for us. Vernon insisted on studying art. I convinced him to choose a more practical major. In the end, we reached a compromise. He goes to law school, but he can take extra art classes. I promised I'd support you if I tried law, Vernon finished. And I did. Tortured myself for a year in a department I hated. And when I realized it wasn't for me and decided to transfer, you know what you said? I'm disappointed, but not surprised. You never could follow through. He said those words with such pain that I felt something clench inside. Had I really said that? Was I really that cruel? And then, Vernon continued, Mom told me the truth about why it was so important to you that I become a lawyer, about why you were always so demanding, about the ambitions you lost and tried to fulfill through me. I felt the blood drain from my face. No, Sylvia couldn't tell him. We swore we'd never. What are you talking about? I asked, trying to stay calm. Vernon looked at me with a mixture of pity and bitterness. That you wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, that you had a chance, a real chance, you were considered for it. But then I came along, the unplanned child of a casual relationship, and you married your mom, gave up your ambitions for the right thing to do. He paused. And you never forgave her or me for ruining your plans. I sat stunned by his words. An old, carefully buried secret suddenly came to the surface like the corpse of a drowned man. She shouldn't have told you, I said quietly. And you shouldn't have made her keep that secret all her life, Vernon parried. You know what else she told me? About how you made her get an abortion when she got pregnant the second time. Because one unplanned child is one too many. I closed my eyes. This part of the story was even more painful. It happened 3 years after Vernon was born. Sylvia and I were just starting to pull ourselves out financially. I was working my ass off trying to rebuild my career after a forced hiatus. And when she told me about the new pregnancy, I didn't force her, I said, opening my eyes. It was a mutual decision. Really? Vernon raised his eyebrows. That's not what she told me. About how she cried at night when she thought you couldn't hear. How she spent her whole life wondering what that child could have been. How she never forgave herself for that decision. And you too. I sat there stunned. Sylvia never told me about it. Never showed me that she regretted our decision. She always seemed so resigned. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, more to myself than to Vernon. The same reason I didn't come to you with the debt problem, he answered quietly. She was afraid of your judgment, of your disappointment, and lived with that fear all her life. I remembered how Sylvia sometimes became quiet and brooding at certain times of the year, at the beginning of spring, when that child was to be born. How she would sometimes stare for long periods of time at the children playing in the park. How she once cried when she saw tiny baby shoes in the store. I always chalked it up to her being emotional. Never connected it to the decision we'd made so long ago. I didn't know, I whispered. I swear I didn't know. That's the problem, Dad. Vernon looked at me with tired sadness. You never knew how the people around you felt. You were so preoccupied with your principles, your sense of duty, that you didn't realize you were breaking the hearts of those you were supposed to love the most. His words hit the target like bullets. Each one hit a sore spot I didn't even know existed. But why didn't you tell me before? I asked. Why did you wait so long? Vernon shrugged. Mom told me not to tell, said it would only make things worse, that you wouldn't change anyway. He was quiet for a moment. And to be honest, I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd hate me even more. I've never hated you, Vernon, I countered. Never. You're my son. Hetko, the son you didn't want. His voice was quiet, but every word hit like a whip. The son who ruined your plans. The son who was never good enough. We sat in silence, and I felt tears come to my eyes. In 50 years as a prosecutor, I had learned to control my emotions, not to show weakness. But now, in the face of this terrible truth, all my barriers were crumbling. Sir, I loved you, Vernon, I said at last. In my own way, maybe wrongly, but I loved you. I still do. He stared at me for a long, sizing me up, as if trying to determine if I was telling the truth. Then why? He asked. Why did you always make me feel like I wasn't good enough? Why didn't you ever support me in the things that were important to me? I took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, I was going to be completely honest with my son, and with myself. Because I was afraid, I admitted, afraid that if you went your own way, the unstable, risky way of art or entrepreneurship, you would fail and you'd suffer. And I couldn't bear that. I couldn't bear the thought of you fighting and losing like I once did. Vernon looked surprised. You? Losing? But you've always been so successful, flawless. I grinned bitterly. Successful? I gave up my dream of becoming a Supreme Court justice, stuck as district attorney 20 years longer than I planned. I'm not blameless, Vernon. Far from blameless. But you always acted like you had all the answers, he said, puzzled. Because it's easier, I admitted. It's easier to pretend you have everything under control than to admit you're as scared and confused as everyone else. Especially when you're a father and you're supposed to be a role model for your son. We were silent again. It was starting to get dark outside the window, and the reflection of our faces in the glass became more and more distinct. Two tired, aged men, bound by blood and a history of pain. What now? Vernon finally asked. What do we do about Turbo Property? And with Owen? I straightened up, trying to gather my thoughts. Despite all the revelations, the reality was still there. My son had committed a crime and was in debt to people who weren't known for mercy. I can help with Turbo Property, I said firmly. I have savings. I'll pay them back the deposit. No, Vernon shook his head. I won't take your money. Not like that, not out of pity. It's not pity, I objected. It's an attempt to make amends for everything I've done or didn't do. Vernon stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to see if I was being sincere. What about Owen? He asked at last. 60,000 is only part of the debt. He needs another 140, and he's not the kind of guy who waits, I wondered. As a lawyer, I knew that any interaction with people like Owen Kramer was a risk. But as a father who just realized how many years he'd lost by pushing his son away, I'll talk to him, I finally said. Maybe we can negotiate an installment plan, or what? Vernon looked at me hopefully. I took a deep breath. Or I'll sell the house. Not for nothing, of course, but quickly. That would pay off all the debts and maybe even leave a fresh start for both of us. Vernon looked astonished. You're going to sell the house? But you said you'd never... It's just a building, Vernon, I interrupted. Bricks, wood, plaster. And you're my family. The only family I have left. And I've already wasted too much time letting my pride and fear stand between us. Vernon's eyes filled with tears, for the first time in our entire conversation. I don't deserve this, he said quietly. Not after what I did. Tried to sell your house behind your back, forged your signature. Maybe, I agreed. But isn't that what family's all about? Giving people what they need, not what they deserve? For the first time in years, Vernon smiled at me, shyly, tentatively, but sincerely. And I felt something warm spill into my chest, a hope I hadn't felt in a long time. What are we going to do next? He asked. First, we find you a safe place to stay, I said firmly. Then I'll get in touch with Bob to straighten out Turbo Property. And then we'll deal with Owen. Vernon nodded, looking a little calmer for the first time in the whole conversation. Thanks, Dad, he said quietly, for, for everything. I reached across the table and squeezed his palm, a gesture I hadn't done since he was a little boy, I think. No, Vernon, I replied. Thank you for giving me another chance to be your father. I'll try not to let you down this time. As we left the cafe, it began to rain. Light, drizzling, but penetrating to the bone. Typical Detroit weather for this time of year. Edmund was waiting for us in the car, delicately not asking questions about our conversation. On the way home, Vernon fell asleep almost immediately in the back seat, exhausted emotionally and physically. I watched him through the rear-view mirror, his gaunt face, the wrinkles around his eyes, the premature gray in his hair. And I thought about all the moments I'd missed, all the chances I hadn't taken to just tell him, I love you, son, just the way you are. We had a challenging road ahead of us. Turbo property problems, Owen Kramer's debt, the possible sale of the house. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear or anxiety, but determination. Determination to fix what could still be fixed. To be the father I should have been all these years, even if it requires a fresh start, in a new house, with new rules, with a new understanding of what it means to be a family. It might be too late, but as I've learned over a long life, better late than never, especially when it comes to the things that really matter. The rain drummed on the roof, dripping down the window panes in winding streams. I sat in a chair in my office, looking at the papers spread out on the desk. A realtor's contract, a home appraisal, real estate options in the Detroit suburbs, smaller properties, more practical for a single man my age. Sylvia's picture lay next to it, one of the last pictures I'd seen of her, taken a month before her illness worsened. It had been a week since Vernon and I had talked in the cafe, a week full of hard decisions and negotiations. I kept my promise and negotiated a refundable deposit with Turbo Property. $60,000 out of my savings was a significant sum, but not fatal. Bob, my old friend and lawyer, helped me get the company to withdraw its claim against Vernon. Owen Kramer was more complicated. A man with a reputation as a ruthless creditor wasn't going to budge. He wanted his money, all $140,000 that remained of Vernon's debt, and he wanted it now. You know, Mr. Blackwell, he said, twirling a toothpick in his fingers, I respect the law, I really do. His thick lips stretched into a smile that did not affect his cold eyes. But the law is a flexible thing, especially when it comes to getting back what's rightfully yours. I agreed to his terms. 2 weeks to sell the house. That same night, I signed a contract with a realtor who specialized in quick transactions. An energetic, middle-aged woman, she assured me that the house would be a bargain. Old mansions were becoming fashionable again in this Detroit neighborhood. Vernon, to my surprise, didn't object to the sale of the house. He was staying with me. Temporarily, we both realized. In the first few days, it was as if we were relearning to exist under the same roof. We were careful to choose our topics of conversation, to give each other space, to avoid mentioning past hurts. One evening, as we sat on the veranda, looking out at the rain, Vernon suddenly asked, Do you really want to sell the house, or are you just doing it because of me? Both, I guess, I answered after a pause. The house is too big for me alone. That was always true, I just didn't want to admit it. And the debt, I sighed. Debt must be paid. That, too, had always been my principle. The house was for sale, and as the realtor predicted, there was a lot of interest. On the fourth day, an offer from a married couple, professors from the local university. The amount offered was 15% below the asking price, but quite reasonable. And most importantly, they could complete the deal quickly, within 10 days. I agreed it would be enough money to pay off Owen Kramer's debt, buy a modest house for me, and leave Vernon a little to start over. I'm thinking about Portland, Vernon said that night, the last night before he disappeared. There's a good art scene there, and startup culture is on the rise. Sounds good, I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment at the thought of him being so far away again. Have you looked for a place to live there yet? I'm just looking at the market. It all depends on how much I have left after I settle up with Owen. I could give you more, I said cautiously. I've got a little more in savings. No, Dad, Vernon shook his head. You're giving away the house anyway. Your house, the place you've shared with Mom all these years. I'm not taking any more. The next morning, all I found was a short note on the kitchen table in Vernon's empty room. Dad, I've thought it over and decided it's best for everyone. I'm leaving today, not to Portland, but somewhere else you'd rather not know about. It's safer that way. Don't worry about your debt to Owen. I negotiated with him directly. He's agreed to a partial payment right now, plus a favor that's better left unsaid too. Keep the rest of the money. You'll need it in your new place. I'm sorry for everything I've done and said, and know that no matter what, I've always loved you. I just didn't know how to show it. I guess that's what makes me your son. Don't try to look for me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Vernon. I reread the note 3 times, not believing my eyes. How could he have made a deal with Owen? What favor did he have in mind? And most importantly, where had he disappeared to in the middle of the night without saying a word? Vernon's phone was disconnected. I immediately called Kramer, but his phone was also unavailable. Bob pulled his contacts and found out that Owen Kramer left town last night. According to his assistant, he was on a business trip and wouldn't be back for a while. Coincidence? Bob asked. Hardly a coincidence, I shook my head. According to Vernon's note, they left together, or at least their departures were somehow connected. As the days went by, I didn't hear from Vernon. The deal to sell the house went through as planned. I'd bought a small house in the suburbs, 1 story, with a small garden and all the comforts of home for a man my age. A practical choice, as Sylvia would say. But every time I looked at those alien walls, I felt an emptiness inside. While sorting through boxes of old things, I came across an album of family photos. Here we are, young, just married. Here are the first pictures of Vernon, a tiny bundle in Sylvia's hands, her face shining with happiness. Here's Vernon taking his first steps, holding on to my fingers. In all these pictures, we look happy, a normal American family. When did things go wrong? Was there a definite moment, a point of no return, or did it happen gradually, day by day, year by year, small jabs and disappointments adding up to a chasm between us? Vernon showed up a month after he disappeared, in a short email. Dad, I'm fine. I'm in Mexico, working on a project. Don't worry, a legit one. Owen is no longer a problem. The debt is closed. I hope you're happy with your new home. I'll get back to you later. There you, I replied, asking questions and asking to know when he planned to return. There was no response. Neither did the next letter or the one I sent another week later. I learned from Bob that Owen Kramer was indeed in Mexico. He had been seen in Cancun, where he was starting a new business. What that business was and how Vernon was connected to it remained a mystery. Life in the new house was slowly getting better. I joined the local retirement community, started going to book club meetings, and got a dog. An old Labrador I named Judge. Days added up to weeks, weeks to months. Rare messages came from Vernon, always short, always from different addresses, always without specific details about his life. Almost a year after his disappearance, a longer letter arrived. Dad, I know you're wondering what happened between Owen and me. The truth is not as dramatic as you probably imagine. He had a business plan to develop a tourist destination in Mexico and needed someone with Spanish and marketing experience. I fit both parameters. We made a deal. I worked for him for 2 years and the debt is considered paid off. I thought about our last real conversation, the one in the cafe. Everything we'd said to each other, about Mom, about the past, and realized that we were both stuck in that past. You and your guilt and frustration, me and my resentment and desire to fit in. Maybe we both needed space, physical and emotional, to move on. I don't know if we'll see each other again. Part of me wants to. Part is afraid we'll just repeat the same old mistakes. But know that I'm not mad at you anymore. And I hope you can forgive me someday too. Vernon. I sat staring at the screen and felt the tears flowing down my cheeks. Not from grief, more like a strange relief. My son is alive. He's safe. And most importantly, he's finally free from his debt, from his past, from his toxic relationship with me. I replied that same evening, Dear Vernon, thank you for the message and for the explanation. I'm glad to know that you are safe and that your situation with Owen was resolved in such a relatively peaceful way. You're right about the past. We've both lived in its shadow for too long. Maybe this distance is just what we both need to finally break free. I don't know if we'll see each other again. I hope we do. At least once to tell you in person what I'm writing to you now. I forgive you for everything, and I apologize for my mistakes, for all the times I wasn't the father you needed. Your new home is wherever you feel free. Mine is here, in a quiet suburb of Detroit, with the dog I named Destiny. Our paths have parted, but the bond remains, in the blood, in the memory, in those rare moments when we were still a real family. Live your life, son, without regard for the past. No fear of disappointing me. You are free, your father? Vernon never replied again. His email address was inactive. Messages were returned with user not found. He disappeared from my life, perhaps forever. Sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings, I would pull out an old photo album and look at the pictures from when we were a family. Sylvia's face full of love. Little Vernon looking at me with an adoration I couldn't keep. To myself, young, with dark hair and a serious look, a man who thought he knew the right way to live and didn't understand the most important thing, that love is more important than rules and acceptance is stronger than control. A late lesson for an old man, but still a lesson I'd finally learned, albeit at the cost of losing everything I'd once held dear.